people speak about making prayer more effective. They say, well, prayer doesn't work. It doesn't work. So let's talk about a few different reasons, even before we get to making it more effective, why prayer seems to not be answered. I didn't used to start here. I used to start with the effectiveness of prayer, all kinds of stories and examples, how you see how effective prayer is. But I think before we get to that, it's important to realize sometimes it looks like prayer doesn't work. Why is that? Okay? Now, the fundamental answer, which is very important, it's not what you think. It's a very, very important idea, is that prayer has many functions. Only one function of prayer is to actually get something. There are many mitzvahs in the Torah, many commandments. You wouldn't say, let's say there's a commandment of living in a sukkah during Sukkot. You sit in a certain hut, a thatched hut with thatched covering, whatever that means, right? So you wouldn't say my sukkah is not working, or my Shabbos candles aren't working. It's not working, right? There's a mitzvah to put a mezuzah on the door. And the mezuzah is not working. What do you mean it's not working? You did it. It's a mitzvah. You did it. It's nothing to do with effectiveness. Prayer, there's a mitzvah to pray. It's a commandment. So you wouldn't say, well, if you did the mitzvah, you say, well, it's not working. The result, getting what I asked for, what does that have to do with anything? It sounds kind of funny, right? Because we're used to thinking of prayer, as we said before, if you think of the relationship with God as what I get, well, then you think prayer doesn't work. You think the mezuzah doesn't work either. Because it's not supposed to do anything. It's a commandment. I put it on, whatever it's for. Of course it does a lot, what I'm saying, but putting it on the door, you don't see an effect because you're thinking about what you receive. If you're thinking about doing what God wants, then you're not looking for the effect. Same idea. But that's very not satisfying, right? Still, we do pray for a lot of things, and we should pray for a lot of things. So why does it seem that sometimes you pray for things you don't get answered? Okay? So let's talk about some of these things. First of all, the assumption is every single prayer is effective. Every single one is effective. Not a small thing. So why it seems to be not answered? Because even if prayer is not answered right now, right here, maybe it's answered in some other form. It's almost always the case that it's answered in some other form. It's just not in the way that you recognize. I'll give you a classic example of this. A few examples. Very, very famous story in the Torah. You have Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel. In the middle of the land of Israel is a pocket of evil called Sodom and Gomorrah. Everyone knows anything about it. Sodom, a pocket of evil. Yeah? Now, if Israel is destined to be the place where there's going to be a Jewish people there and there's going to be a whole nation that's dedicated to serve God and do the right thing, you can't have a pocket of evil right in the middle. It's self-defeating. So, Sodom was given many chances to actually get their acts together. That's a whole discussion by itself. But they continually refused and refused and refused. They didn't want to do what they wanted. They said, no, we want to do what we want. Now, so God said, okay, threshold. We've hit the top. I've had it, so to speak, right? It's not good for them anymore. They've had it. Not good. So Hashem's going to destroy them. But he says, I have to tell Avram Avinu. Can I cover this up? Can I hide this from Avram Avinu? From Abraham? I can't hide it from him. He's going to be a great and mighty nation. How can I hide it from him? Now that's a strange thing to say. What they should say, this is what it says in the verse. The verse says, should I cover up from Avram, or hide from him what I'm going to do, meaning destroy Sodom? He's going to be a great and mighty nation in the future. How can I hide that from him? So then he tells him, God tells Avram, and Avram prays at length. And the prayer, he prayed for about a week. It was a tremendous, or maybe 12 hours straight. Incredible prayer. On and on and on and on and on. Intense prayer. Now, did it work? No. Next day he wakes up, goes back to the same place. Not a week, I made a mistake. I was thinking about Moshe Rabbeinu's prayer, excuse me. Yeah? He prays for about 12 hours straight. He wakes up the next morning. He looks to the place where Sodom is. He sees a mushroom cloud, or the equivalent. Didn't work, right? So there's a tremendous prayer that seems to not work. What's going on here? I thought prayer always works. What's going on? Yeah? And also, a bigger question, why in the world would God tell Avram Avinu, tell Abraham that he's going to tell him so he prays when he knows it's not going to work? What's the point? It's a good question, right? So listen to this amazing idea. The verse says, the verse says, can I hide from Avram what I'm going to do? He's going to be a great and mighty nation. I'm not hiding it from him because he's going to have many children come out from him. What's the connection? It should say, I'm not hiding from him because he lives in Israel and he's going to be the one who's in charge of this whole place, so to speak, where his children will be. Don't say, should I hide from him because he's going to have many children? Say, I'm going to hide from him because they're going to take over the country. They have to know, or he's going to pray for them. What do you mean? Because there's no connection. Yeah? So the answer is the following. This is a beautiful thing. All of the prayers of the Avos, of Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, all of them, even for their own personal issues, they were all a projection into the future. They used their personal experiences as an emotional goad, fancy word, yeah? As an inspiration. A goad is like something that jabs you a little, gets you to move a little bit, right? When you get these words, when you read certain things, you get goad, old English. Anyway, so it gets you moving somewhere. It's a motivation, it's inspiration, right? If I told you somewhere on the Neve campus here, there's a gorilla. He's on the loose. Now they're big and they're a little bit dangerous. Not all of them, but some of them are. Definitely not, definitely wouldn't let a baby play with a gorilla, put it that way. Let's not get political. We get the idea, right? So if that happens, you say, okay, one thing. Let's say I tell you now that the gorilla's on this floor. Different feeling. Yeah? And then all of a sudden, God forbid, the gorilla rips off that door and says, Rabbi Altman, why'd you start class without me? Yeah? Come on in, Mr. Gorilla. Yeah? The feeling of seeing the gorilla with your eyes is a totally different story than just knowing someplace with your mind that it exists, correct? Yeah? Now, here, Hashem wants Avram to pray for his nation in the future, but they don't exist yet. They're not real. So what God does is he shows someone else with a foregone conclusion, a done deal, it's already over, the case is closed. But Avram doesn't know that. In a terrible situation, he shows them. They're in danger, they're going to die. So he prays for them, and God uses the prayer for that nation for Avram's children. Hear what I'm saying? Lahavdil, right? Not the same thing. There was a book I read. I read this book actually when it came out. I heard they made a movie about it, but it's after my time. Ender's Game. Ever heard of it? It was a genius kid. He was an orphan, and he was in a military school. And it's in the future. So different levels of working up the military school was to show on a computer screen different simulations of battle. And he had to direct all the battles so he could win. So what happened was, it gets more and more and more complicated until it's almost an impossible battle. Like it's the alien race fighting against the humanity and trying to take over the earth and the whole thing, right? Eventually he does what he has to do and he wins. It's a whole thing. Turns out that each one of these battles was not actually a game, it was actually real. And whatever he did is what they did out there in the battlefield. Interesting thing, yeah? Because they knew he was such a creative genius, a military strategist. So that's the same thing with us. That's what's saying with Avraham Avinu. Hashem says, I'm going to show you this case. It's really a done deal. There's nothing you can do about it. But all that prayer that you use for them is going to be used for your people and your future offspring. It makes it much more real. So it's true. And then throughout the generations, even though this group of people died, generations of Jewish people got saved because of that one prayer alone. So his prayer was answered, just not in the form that he wanted it. Now you could say, well, it doesn't work. No. Hashem showed him in a place that was impossible to work. That's number one. Second one, sometimes you think it doesn't help, but it does help. You didn't realize it. I'll give you a few examples. Sometimes what has to happen is you have to hit threshold. You have to pray again and again and again. You're almost there. You pray one more time, the whole thing opens up. I heard a mashal once, they said people that are stone cutters, the old time they used to cut stone. So what they would do is they would bang and bang and bang and bang, and nothing would happen after many, many hits on the... and then at one time you hit, you bang, and the whole bunch of stone comes off. What happens? So what happens? Is it just because you got really lucky? No. When you're hitting every single time, it's making little micro fissures in the stone, little splits in the stone, and eventually you can't see them. Eventually that last hit, it just opens up all the splits and the whole thing falls off. That's what happens. But if you stop, it might be this close, but you never find out. Right? So that's the same thing over here. Sometimes, let's say you're praying for someone who's sick. And it's not working. Many people are praying for them. It's not working. They're still sick. Maybe just a little more. Be surprised. That's one example. Another example, there's many, many examples here. Sometimes it happens that you pray for somebody and eventually they still die. They die anyway, so it looks like it didn't work. Maybe it extended their life. They had some more time to spend with family, more time to arrange their affairs, to get their own personal growth in a different way. You can't tell. We don't know that, of course. But that also, well, they're supposed to live to a certain point. Now they live much longer just because of the prayers. How about another example? Sometimes it happens that the person dies, and maybe they would have died the same time, But now those prayers, just like Avraham Avinu, was used to save the community. That often happens too. Hashem says this person needed to die at a certain point. They could have just died in their sleep. But God says, I want to use their being sick as an impetus, as an inspiration for people to pray in general. That community prays in general and saves them from all kinds of other difficulties, even though it wasn't exactly what they were praying for. Okay, now, sometimes it happens also, which you can't tell as well, that the person was meant to suffer much more. But now they're suffering less. It actually made it easier. There's a lot of different ways that you can't tell. So that actually did help. Now, the last thing, and this is probably the most important one about this particular point, is this world is like a gym. Yeah? Let's say a person goes on a vacation and they want to go to the spa. Right? So this way is the spa, this way is the gym. And they got it reversed. So they think they're going to the spa. They walk in, they see it's not a pleasant place at all. Yeah, it's the gym. Heavy weights, right? People sweating and grunting and yelling. Exhausted, right? Maybe it doesn't smell so nice, whatever. Who knows what? I guess they have a lot of air conditioning, but a little bit less there. Whatever it is, people say, like, this looks like a Gehenna. It's not the spa. This looks like hell over here, excuse me. What's going on, right? So that's what this world is. This world is basically a big gym. It's not a spa. People think of it as a spa, so they suffer unnecessarily. If you go to the gym, you could really ask them, can you please do me a favor? I'll give you $5. Can you lift these weights for me? You can do that if you want. That's not the point. This world is a gym, right? The next world is a spa. Depending on what you look like here, you can show off in the spa, basically. Whatever, if that's important to you. Now, this is very important. When a person goes through this world, he wants to leave, she wants to leave with maximum development, maximum spiritual growth and emotional growth and intellectual growth, right? So there's different ways to grow. You can grow personally, but one way you can grow also is because you helped other people grow. That's part of the chesed we spoke about before, the kindness. If you help other people grow, that's also a merit for you. So when a person dies, or they're sick, and then they die, right? So if other people were aware of that sickness and they prayed for that person, then that's a tremendous source of merit for the sick person. So when the person leaves the world, they have an enormous source of merit now that they didn't have before, simply because other people were praying for them. So you can't say the prayers were not effective. They were effective. Other people praying for a sick person makes those other people better. It makes their world more complete. Like we said, the world stands on three things. It makes them better. And because they became better as a result of this person being sick, that's a merit for that sick person. That sick person now leaves the world at the same time anyway, with a tremendous merit that they would never have had. Good. Now, another idea, not related. Sometimes it happens that you pray for something and you don't get answered for the classic reason because the thing that you're asking for is not good for you. You don't realize that, but it's not good for you. So it's a whole discussion about this. I'm not going to be too technical, but one way of saying it's a cute quote is that some of God's greatest gifts are unanswered prayers. Very important. You don't know exactly when. Sometimes you ask for something that you think it's good. Now, the problem is like this. It's hard to know what's good for us long term. There's an old Yiddish joke. They say that the man comes to the rabbi. Rabbi, it's the worst thing. My son, what happened to your son? He broke his leg. Isn't that the worst thing, Rabbi? Maybe it is. Maybe it isn't. Same joke, right? Rabbi, it's the greatest thing. Because he had a broken leg, he wasn't playing outside. And when the Russians came in and rounded him up for the army, they rounded up all the kids. My kid wasn't outside, so he didn't get thrown into the army for 25 years. Isn't that great? Maybe it is. Maybe it isn't. And it goes on and on. You can't exactly tell. It could flip back and forth, right? Now, when you pray, how are you supposed to pray if you know that sometimes you're praying for something that's not good? Might not be good for you. How are you supposed to pray that way?
Believe that God is your Father and He's going to give you only what's good for you.
Good. Believe that God's your Father is going to give it to you if it's good, and if it's not good, He won't give it to you. But you don't always want to take that chance.
Why? You're not going to get something that's not good for you.
Sometimes it could happen. You might get something that's not good for you. Sometimes it happens. So, simply speaking, you pray, and you say, God, by the way, all of the above, only give it to me if it's good for me. The way they say it in Hebrew is, V'hatoiv be'enecha aseh. That which is good in your eyes, please do. Always add that little caveat at the end, right? God, whatever, as long as it's good. Whatever's good in your eyes, please do that. If it's not good in your eyes, I don't want it. Okay? Good. That's very important. Now, let's come back to that story about Avraham Avinu. This is quite amazing. Now, this is a little spiritual. But it's okay because we're in Neve. Now, I'm not going to explain what I mean, what I'm going to say right now. I'm just going to give you the facts as it is. It's not. It's way beyond this class to really explain to you how we know this is true and where it comes from. So I'm assuming these things are true. Okay, that's a whole discussion by itself. But I want to illustrate the point. In the same case with Avram Avinu, very strange thing happened over here. The Svarim, the old Kabbalistic Svarim tell us that closer to the creation of the universe, the souls were bigger and more powerful. Whatever that means. They were bigger neshamas, bigger souls. Now, it was a very difficult time when something's right at the beginning. There's a lot of confusion. There's a lot of power going in different directions, whatever that means. But some of these great souls were lost to the negative side, the dark side, as they say in Star Wars terms, yeah? The dark side of the Force, that type of thing, right? So God doesn't want any neshama to get lost, get stuck. The problem is some of these souls get stuck in the negative side. It takes a long time to try to get them out. They can't always get out, whatever that means. It's not a discussion right now. It's being kind of vague. But they get stuck. So God does what he can to try to bring them back. So what he does is he gives them a new chance at life. At a certain point, people get many chances to come back as a reincarnation. It's not like that anymore. Now and then it happens, but it's not. It used to be 10 times, 20 times, nothing like that anymore. Now there's a limit. Let's say there's 3 times and that's it. Okay? Now, those days, those neshamas, those souls that were lost to that negative side, God was trying as much as he can, so to speak, giving them many opportunities to come back and get it right. So eventually he brought them back again and again and again. First generation was the generation that was destroyed in the flood. It still didn't work. He brought them back as a generation that got dispersed across the world when they built the Tower of Babel. Same thing. That still didn't work. Eventually he brought them back as the people that lived in Sodom, in this area that we talk about as being destroyed. So then comes Avram Avinu, and he prays to have them saved. His prayer didn't save them from death, but it did somehow, again, I don't claim to even know what I'm saying right now, but the idea is true, right? It somehow got them away from the negative side, that they're now in the neutral zone. Yeah? They're no longer connected to the negativity, to the evil on that side. Now they can come back in a blank, ground level way. And when they came back again, and they were able to get their acts together. Now, so his prayer didn't help them to save their bodies, but it did save their souls, which is a totally different story. Now, who were they? That's us. That was the generation that came back as the Jewish people in Egypt. So when it says, should I hide from Avram Avinu? Should I hide from Avram, from Abraham? What I'm going to do, I'm going to destroy Sodom? That's his future kids. If he prays for them, he can get them away from that negative side, and I can bring them back on a ground level now, and they can start over, and a lot of them will actually make it, which is exactly what happened. But Avram had no idea that was the case. He didn't know that. It didn't look that way. What's the connection between these evil people in Sodom and the people that came back in the generation of Egypt? It didn't look like the same, but they were. The souls were the same. It's an amazing thing. Okay, so sometimes what you actually praying for, you said no over there, it did help you in some other form exactly the way you wanted it. Much better. Much better. Okay, good. Now, here's another thing also, but quite interesting. Sometimes God doesn't answer your prayer right away because he wants you to keep on praying. It's a very important concept. The idea is that there's a relationship in prayer. If the only time I come to you is when I need something, and you instantly grant what I need, well, I won't come to you for a while afterwards. So sometimes God will say, listen, I'm going to hold off because I finally got you to talk to me. It's good for you to talk to me. It's good for you to have a relationship with me like we said before. Sometimes what it is God says, you're talking to me. I know you're going to keep on talking to me, but I'd like you to speak to me in a deeper way, a more intimate, a closer way, make it more real. So that's why there's delay also in answering of prayers. He wants to make it more real. You can get deeper. We get more of a connection. Now, another reason why prayer is not answered. There's a long list of requirements to make prayer proper. Now, that sounds kind of funny. Why should that be? So I heard a story a long time ago from, I think, Rabbi Friedman, who said, an ambassador of Israel once had to have audience with the Queen of England. Now, the Queen of England already had no power, but you had to learn how to approach the Queen. You walk forward and you bow a few times, and then she nods to you, take a few more steps, or whatever the details are. And you say, it is my honor to be, something to the effect, there's a whole language that you say, a whole speech that you say, to present the statement or to greet her Majesty of the Court of St. James, something like that. I don't know how it works. A whole long speech, right? You have to memorize, do it right, and she backs into you, and then you wait till she finishes, then you back backwards. A whole thing. He said he was sweating profusely. He practiced many times, and she had no power. No power. But still the queen, right? So people get affected by it. So in order to approach God for our own purposes, you can always ask him in the most simple way. It's always the case. But the more effective, it's much more effective when we realize we're entering into the palace. Now we're entering into inner chambers and inner chambers until we finally get to the throne room. And now I'm standing before the actual throne and the king himself. When we approach it that way, it's much more effective. That's what the laws have to do with that. The laws of davening, of prayer, have to do with that idea of making it set up so that we feel that it's real, that we give it its proper honor. Now, if we're missing some of those things, you're missing critical ingredients, it doesn't come out the same. I'll give you a mashal, a metaphor. There was a peasant man many years ago who lived in it's not a true story, who lived in a vast kingdom. And he was not a very fancy man. But he said, one time he says to his wife, I'd like to eat the meal that the kings eat just once. I want to eat a king's meal. She says, great, honey, you get the ingredients, I'll make it for you, no problem, right? Okay, turns out he knows somebody who works in the kitchen of the king. He finds out, get me a recipe for anything that the king eats, no problem. Gets a recipe for some delicious meal. Maybe it's a cake, right? Okay, it says triple filtered flour exposed to only the right sunlight at the right time in the right atmospheric conditions. She goes to the store, local, convenience store, whatever it is, or a 24-hour supermarket, and says, do you have any of this? Sorry, we don't have that. She looks online, can't find it. Yeah. She finally says this. She Googles it, and she finds out. Oh, there's no Google there. You get the idea. She finds out. Oh yeah, you can get it from the royal houses in the royal house in Romania. They have if you order 6 months in advance and you're a country, they'll consider your request. Okay, so she goes to the store, she buys regular flour. Good flour, but regular flour. Good. Now I need Belgian chocolate. Not just any Belgian chocolate, etc., 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 etc. Now I need Himalayan salt that was carried without being shocked by the pressure of gravity. It was carried on special llamas down from the Himalayan mountains. I don't know, a whole long story, right? She says, okay, we'll just get regular table salt. On and on and on. Eventually, she makes this thing without any of the real ingredients. And then obviously, so the guy tastes the food and he says, this is disgusting. Those kings must be crazy to eat this stuff. Now, you see what's going on? He assumes right away, I'm doing it right, all the ingredients are correct, but it doesn't taste good. If something's missing from tefillah, it's because the ingredients are missing. That's usually what's going on here. Yeah? You have to take it seriously. The proper honor that's accorded to tefillah, to prayer. There's a term that's mentioned in the Talmud about prayer to make prayer effective. That term is called tefillah shlema, a complete prayer. Tefillah shlema. The Gemara says that tefillah shlema, a complete prayer is answered. What does that mean? There's a lot of discussion here, but there's one meaning of the word that I want to talk about today. A tefillah shlema, a complete prayer, is that you understand the only one that can help you is God. If he wants, it's going to happen. If he doesn't want, it's not going to happen. A fundraiser. He's building a school. He wants to raise money. He travels far away to many wealthy communities. He said, please help us out. We're a poor community back home. We don't have enough money to build a school for our children. Please help us out. So he's in a particular town with many wealthy people. And he says to them, this one and this one. And he goes, everyone says no. Finally, he goes to the last wealthy person. And he says to her, please give me money for my school. And she says, well, did you try everybody else? Why did you try them? And he says, I tried them. They all said, no, you're the only one that can do it for me now. That's a different type of request than, please help me, other people can help also. When you approach God and you say, God, you're the only one that can do it for me. If you don't want it, it's not going to happen. If you do it will, that's a different level of prayer. That's called a tefillah shlema, complete prayer. Now, together with that is the last thing, we'll stop with this. Two more things. You have to believe in the power of prayer. Now, that sounds very religious. You must believe. Right? I'm not making fun. I'm making fun of myself. Now, what I mean to say is, when you approach somebody who loves you and cares about you, is very, very kind and very, very giving, like your grandmother, or maybe your mother, or somebody like that, yeah? Usually the mother's a little more strict, but the grandmother, they can spoil the grandchildren. Yeah? My wife said to me a great piece of advice. She said, why should only the grandparents be the ones to spoil the kids? Well, let's spoil them also. I said, good idea. Like now and then you say, okay, Abba says, Daddy says, Mommy says, you have to eat this chocolate ice cream now. Let's go. You want another one? Okay. Now and then. It's good to spoil the kids. Anyway, it's another story. But let's say you go to your grandmother and she says, you say, you're really hungry. So what happens when you go to your grandmother, you're hungry? Whatever you want. Whatever you want, Tata la mama. You want to eat something? Here, have some food. Plenty. Take more, more, more. The worst thing to do to your grandmother is to show up totally full. Yeah? Never do that. Yeah? It's pain for her, right? So you say to your grandmother, okay, Grandma, I'm really hungry, but before I got a list here. Here's a note from my teacher that says I was a good girl today, this week, Everything was great. And here's a note from my mother, and here's my report card, and the local police report. I'm not in it. Right? Everything's fantastic. So you say, can I please have a cookie? She'll look at you like, it's Grandma. I don't care if you're in jail, chas v'chala, God forbid. I'll give you cookies wherever you are. You're always going to be my little tatala, my little baby. You know what I'm saying? It's always like that, yeah? When you approach God for something like this, anything that you want, a cookie or something bigger than a cookie or a lot of cookies or a Lamborghini, whatever it is that you want, yeah? You say, God, I believe in your kindness. I believe in your love and your giving. So therefore, I don't believe in the power, the effectiveness of my prayer because I'm praying, but because of who you are. When you pray that way, everything's different. If you walk in there going, listen, God, I've been a good boy, I've been a good girl recently, and I really think you should give me this, then God will look at your merits, and very often the answer may be no. But if you say, God, look at who you are, you're like Bubba, you're Safta, your grandma. You're like a motherly love, unconditional. That's a different story. An example of that. At one point, Hagar and Yishmael. How do you say Hagar in English? Hagar. Hagar? Hagar. 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 And Yishmael would be Ishmael. Sounds funny in English. Ishmael, yeah? Hagar and Ishmael were going someplace, and they were lost in the desert. He was sick. The boy was sick. He was 13 years old, and he was sick, Ishmael. And his mother prayed for him, and he prayed for himself. And the verse says that God answered the prayer of the boy, Ishmael, not the mother, Hagar. Now, mother's prayers are very, very effective. So the question is, why were her prayers not answered, but his prayers were? He was very sick, he was going to die. So one answer, there's a lot of answers. One answer is because when he prayed from a sense of hope. And she prayed in a sense of despair. She actually placed him further away, and she said, I don't want to see him die. I don't want to see him die. She thought he's going to die. Might as well pray. But his name is Yishmael. Yishmael is Yishma Kel. God will hear. That's his essence. His essence is, when I pray, God answers. When people pray, God answers. Not just him. He believed that God answers prayers. Because he prayed from a sense of hope, and his mother prayed from a sense of despair, his prayers were answered and his mother's weren't. Make sense? Okay? There's more to talk about here, but we'll stop. All the best. Nice to see everybody.